All right, welcome everybody. We have, it is Thursday, March 16th, and we're going to spend this morning on a couple of different bills, H276. And we're going to talk to David Hall from Legislative Council about H213. But we heard testimony from Commissioner Hanford the other day about the rental housing registry, and while it's clear that the administration doesn't support the bill, we wanted to make sure, as a rule, we wanted to make sure that we talked to folks that Commissioner Hanford brought up, which was the Agency of Digital Services and tomorrow the tax department. And so we wanted to have Sean Naylor, who's the Secretary of the Agency of Digital Services, join us. If you'd like to.
Excellent.
And Secretary Naylor, this is your first time in our committee, so we're just gonna take a quick circle around, introduce ourselves to you, and then I'll kind of tee up a question for you and let you go. Let's start with our representative who's online.
Hello, Ashley Bartley, Fairfax in Georgia.
Then Tom Stevens from Waterbury.
Joe Parsons, represent Thompson, Groton, and Newbury.
Caleb Elder, the Addison 4 District.
Dennis LeBounty, Linden, Sutton, Newark, Sheffield, Wheelock.
Good morning. I'm Elizabeth Burrows, and I represent Windsor 1, which is Heartland, West Windsor, and Windsor.
I'm Larry Labor. I represent Essex, Orleans District 1.
Mary Howard, and I represent Rutland District 6.
And Robin Chestnut Tangerman, Rutland Bennington District.
Secretary Naylor, I just welcome again. And so the question specifically that we have is we're proposing a program that would be housed in the Department of Housing and Community Development. And the testimony we received from Secretary Hanford was that the way that we work now is we can't just tell DHCD to do something without understanding that in the case of developing a data collection system, it has to go through ADS and they have to use their budget in order to make the request. You provide estimates of what the costs are going to be, and while I don't think we'll get to a specific estimate cost this morning, we just wanted to hear from you what the process would be, and if you have any estimates on what a program like this that would be trying to collect this information. We'll hear from Secretary Bolio tomorrow, Commissioner, regarding the landlord certification program at the Department of Taxes. But again, the process, the goal, I don't know if you've reviewed the bill enough, but the goal of the system here, the registry that we're looking for, is to have an application process or registration process for property owners and then to register individual units that they own for a particular fee. So we just wanted to hear from you about what the process would be for us, for DHCD, to order up and implement the program that would do that for us. So welcome.
Thank you. So for the record, Sean Naylor, Secretary, Agency of Digital Services. It is my first time here, so it's nice to meet you all. Thank you for the introductions. Hopefully I can provide some insight to your questions today. I did get a chance to review the bill and look at it. And so I'll take you through a high-level journey of how we go from an idea to a fully implemented solution in state government, right, as we currently work. So we start with a process called the Information Technology Activity Business Case. So we affectionately refer to that as ITABC because we always like to have acronyms in our world. You may have heard that if you've maybe in other committees or us reference it, the ITABC, but that's the point by which we start the process, because what that does is that it kind of gets down the major risks for doing the project, the major risks for not doing the project. It usually will identify the justification, the like initial approach to moving forward, and do high-level estimates. And then from there, those that are involved from both an ADS perspective and in this instance, the ACCD perspective, would review and sign off on it before any work started, right? It's kind of like let's make sure we're all on the same page before we spend a dollar. That process often is informed by what's called a request for information. Call them RFIs. And an RFI is used to give us that initial estimate when we don't have a sense of how big the breadbasket is, right? Is it this big or this big? And so that RFI process is usually where we really start on the unknown. As I looked through the bill last night and yesterday, this has a lot of interesting technical considerations that's going to have to be done. And I would like to I'll give you examples of that, but the scale and scope is significant enough that we would want to do an RFI. So what does an RFI do? A request for information, in essence, goes out to the world. We post it on our bidding sites and make sure that certain vendors we think are capable of doing this type of work will respond to it. And it's not binding, but what it is it helps us define, to do these very high level expectations, it's going to run roughly this much, right? It's like order of magnitude estimating, right? Is it 1 million, 5 million, 10 million, 20 million, 50 million, that kind of thing. And so it gives us a place to start to ensure that everyone understands what we're looking at before we get started. And this is unlike anything I think that we have currently. I was going through our current application, so I don't have something that I could say, oh, it is comparable to X, and X cost us X amount, Y to build and so much to maintain annually. So, you're correct in your assumption that I probably wouldn't be able to give you an estimate today on how much this is going to cost. This would be more of that, going through that extensive process of doing the ITABC and then a request for information to get some better estimates. Once we have those back, if what we have for funding can cover it, the project, then we would issue what's called a request for proposals to go out, and actually then that would lead to the binding contract to the development of the solution. The things that are outlined in the expectations in the bill are not something that would be an in-house created solution. This is going to have significant cybersecurity and normal security and privacy components to it. And we can step through some of the details, or at least as I read it, why I believe that. So this would be something that would be developed by either hopefully something out there that's available close in the commercial market, or developed by a vendor for us. Once we complete that RFP process, we would then negotiate, enter into contract, and start the project to build, to deliver the system that will run anywhere from 12 to 36 months, depending on scale and significant, the amount of functionality that is required of the system. Some can take even longer, but which would then yield what would be then the finished product. One of the important things that we do for all systems that are public facing is before we go live is we do what's called a security penetration test. We want to make sure that we're not going to put out there something that is a risk to either the state or the citizens that are using the system. And so usually we set aside a portion of time and funding to ensure that the first iteration of the solution is going to be sound from a security perspective. One thing that I omitted in that process is after that kind of RFP where we go out and we look for the vendors that are interested in doing work with us and stuff. And before we sign a contract, we do what's called an independent review. And this is in statute, and it's required by anything over $1 million, which this would definitely be well beyond that work. So they would have an independent review, which means somebody from, there's a series of non-state entities, consultants that are under retainer contract that we would put out a statement of work to, for them to kind of come in and validate everything that we've done up to that point, make sure the technology we're choosing is appropriate, that there isn't any like red flags out there that we might have missed about the potential vendor or our approach to building the system. And that independent review also looks at, some making sure that the cost estimates are in place, that the terms and conditions of the contract are reasonable, just has a third set of eyes. And so that is a step that is in there between when we select the vendor and before we sign the contract, just to make sure that everybody's comfortable with it. I'm going to pause there. I've been talking nonstop, and see if there's questions from anyone in the committee.
I have several questions, and ranging from the non-tech naive questions to other naive basic questions. But from a non-tech savvy person's perspective, this seems to me to be a database, and we have hundreds of databases throughout the state. And so how is this unique from the existing databases that we have and the existing models and programs?
So that's a great question. And this is why when I look through this, I'm going to start with a geeky answer, and then we'll get to, hopefully can translate that to one that's not geeky. A database is a storage means, period. So a database is just the industrial strength version of Microsoft Excel in most instances. It is just multiple tabs of rows and columns of information. At a basic level, a database provides no functionality. It's just a repository. So where all of the risk and all of the work comes from is, how do you build an interface to that data repository that is secure, safe, provides the appropriate functions, doesn't compromise people's information. And so when we talk about building a public-facing registry, there is a lot of risk associated with that because it is going to be public-facing. We're talking, if I've did my homework properly, upwards of 80,000 units. If I don't know what that means as far as individual owners or landlords, but I'm going to assume at least a couple of thousand scattered throughout the state that would need to have access to that. So that means a strong login and credentialing system so that Sean Naylor can't go in and change somebody else's information. It means means of validating, but because it's only annually, or also there's going to have to be infrastructure built so that when they forget the password they set last year, there's an automated means for them to put something in, get something of response, because we don't have like help desks sitting around with people to answer questions about how to reset passwords for the general public. So there is going to be a level of complexity that comes by just the nature of kind of the scale and scope of what's going to be public facing on that and the likely diversity of users that would be interacting with that. So that's going to be a significant scale. So you're right in that a database is just a database, but it's all of the things that come in front of that that is going to be really where the critical effort is. So did you have other questions? Because that was going to get me started on going down the path on some other really interesting facets to this as it relates to technology.
Casting about for what might be similar, I think of DMV and auto registration. Mm-hmm. This is, vastly simpler because it's a far less turnover and far fewer people. And I know that setting up a DMV registry would be daunting, but from the expression on your face, it looks like I'm mistaken on the that this should be simpler, even though simply because it's smaller.
This is analogous to kind of the challenges we have with education right now in Vermont. The requirements are such that regardless of the size of the school, you still have certain fundamental things you have to provide to your students, right? And so you don't get second language or special ed or, certain skills any cheaper because the school is smaller, right? The cost of having a janitor is the cost of having a janitor. The cost of having a gymnasium and sports teams and travel, there's a certain amount of scale that goes with it, but to have the fundamentals, it's still overhead. And whether we're doing let's just use security as an example. That security penetration test that I talked about as a requirement to ensure, while there were maybe more pieces to test in our DMV modernization system that's going to handle driver registration and licensing, it's still going to be not much cheaper to do this one because you still have to look for all of the same gaps, holes, risks, opportunities for bad actors to exploit what you've got. So while scale factors in to some degree, it's not a linear relationship where something small on the web only gets this little bit of attention and something big on the web deserves this much, because they're all exposures that we have to address in our potential risk to the state. So there isn't a nice, clean, linear relationship.
Thank you. One more, and then I'll let other people jump in. So understanding that there's an initial one-time cost for setting up the program and technology involved, do you have any concept of how many positions maintenance of a program like this would be? And I'm not to hold you to it, just to.
No, I don't know, because it would depend on the technology it's built on. So if we can find something that is roughly can provide the functionality is commercially available, then that would likely come with like a subscription type license model, where then that vendor would be providing like routine updates in maintenance. But that comes with a cost. And what I will say is that over time, and I'm talking over the last 25 years, it's held up well that you can plan on a 20% annualized cost for maintenance and operation to 20% of what the implementation cost was. And that is to ensure that it stays current and it's upgraded, right? So we have something here that you're going to be building for a large audience, a large public audience. So things like, which may seem you may not have crossed your mind, but the ability to check whether that person is using Safari on an iPad, Safari on a phone, so the web browser, or on a Mac, or are they a Chrome user, or are they a Microsoft, whatever that one is now, Edge. I don't use Microsoft Edge, or whatever, or do they have an old system I'm going to date myself, and they have Netscape Navigator, so.
Hopefully not.
But we don't get to manage that, right? So there's a certain amount that you have to, there's going to be, part of the solution is like testing to understand how are they connecting to you? Is what they're connecting to you with a risk? So then you don't allow them to do business because it's an outdated browser that's been proven to show that it's risky. But then they all come out with new versions. So there's got to be a continuous upgrade path to this, so that when somebody comes in, somebody registered their stuff year one, when they come back in year two to renew, they use their exact same browser, but they've got a new PC, new browser, and now the site doesn't work with it. And so there's frustration and angst, and they're running around trying to figure out because they waited till the last day, and now there's fees incurred if you don't do it right. And so there's a lot that goes in to ensure that we in the technology are not going to introduce problems for the program, and that all carries like overhead with it. And so that 20% has stood the test of time as being like a good baseline, that whatever that initial cost is, plan on 20% annually to license it, maintain it, and support it.
Thank you.
Member Burrows?
I have a couple of questions, is that all right? And the first question is, to what degree would you first take a look at the databases that already exist in Burlington? I think is Brattleboro another one of them? How would you use their systems to inform what you would put an RFP out for?
That's a good question. So in that initial project where I talked about the ITABC form, one of the things we ask is who else is doing this? Are they successfully doing it and stuff, right? So we try to canvas at that point what our options are. And when we've identified those, a lot of times it could be pure states, right? We like to reach out and understand what's going on in that state. So that's when we would initiate an investigation and say, okay, does theirs have the functionality, the security, the kind of the breadth, meet the scope of what we're looking for, or could it be the basis for something that we would start with? And so that's when that would start, is that research would go in. We would also look at it and say, I don't know if Burlington's is homegrown or commercially available, but if it's commercially available, I talked about doing the RFI process, right? Request for information. We would make sure that vendor is directly made aware of the RFI, so we can say, okay, how does what you have scale to a statewide solution? And so we would explore those things as part of that process.
And I wonder, is there any state law that requires a database like this not to be cloud-based? Or could it be cloud-based?
Oh, so no, there is not state law, but there is state standards, and our standard is cloud before anything. So this will be cloud.
Okay.
This will be, which is why I talked about, if we would probably not be prepared to build it ourselves in-house. This would likely be either something that was a product that was somewhat commercially available, although it's it's not like everybody has this need, but there is enough of the need. There's probably people filling that need on a commercial basis, or something that was custom built on one of our cloud-based platforms like Salesforce or something like that.
Okay, my last question is, what scale does your department do in-house?
It depends on the team in the agency that's supporting it. We have I won't say we have different models. We have different levels of capability for certain areas. So the way I would characterize it is it tends to mimic the uniqueness of the programs and the delivery of the agency we support. So I spent the first 29 years of my career in transportation. Transportation is pretty much the leader in engineering in state government, right? A&R has some engineers and there's some others, but I mean, transportation does engineering work. That was a mix of what was like commercially available, the type of stuff that, the computer-aided drawing, the geographic information systems, all of those. But there were times where Vermont had unique needs for doing cost allocations based on the federal formulas for match and stuff like that in transportation fund from Federal Highway, where we would develop something because it was unique to Vermont. So there was no commercial offering. So we tend to focus on in-house development for those things that are really kind of Vermont unique. So that's where we have more of that strengths and would do it. But even then, we're trying to minimize the number of those systems because that relies on a workforce, which is, at least when it comes to technology, folks in Vermont is a continuous influx.
And I've got one more, if that's all right. Don't developers that develop for cloud-based services automatically offer browser support?
They may, mostly
It seems odd that they wouldn't offer browser support if they're cloud-based.
So there's a couple of ways that you can look at this. We can have cloud solutions that are built and hosted by someone, and then that is absolutely the truth. What would be an example of that? our use of Microsoft's Office 365 for email, Teams, Word, Excel, and everything else, we don't have to worry about browser support. That is all part and parcel of what we get from Microsoft in our annual licensing. But we may have other solutions that I'm going to pick, say, Salesforce, where we use to develop platforms that are constituent centric, right? Because it's a customer relation management solution, so it's people centric. In those instances, someone may build a solution for us. It's not a commercially available one. It is kind of a custom solution for us, and they may use items from third-party vendors. They may incorporate their own code that does things. That is the part that now has a maintenance tail to it. Even though it's in the cloud, it's running on a Salesforce platform, the custom side of it causes us to make sure we have coverage to ensure that it's maintained and supported moving forward. I hope that answered the question.
Sort of, yeah, thank you.
I wish it was easy to just say all yes or all no. But our world is unfortunately not that kind of defined.
So ADS is not apolitical. Well, you're not policymaking. I mean, is it fair to say that you're not a policymaking organization? Like if I'm coming to you if I'm with the Department of Housing and Community Development, I have a policy need for this particular database, and your ADS says we can do that, or we have to contract. I mean, we have to go through this process. And you make recommendations, well, you should do it this way or this way, but not based on policy, is that?
We rely on our partners, our peers in the cabinet, right, that they're handling the policy that's in their purview. To say that we're not policy, though, is we just left House Government Operations, where we testified on a critical infrastructure cybersecurity bill that we really would like to make sure you all support, H291. See move forward because what's that?
That's not political.
So our policy is really limited to the technology spaces, and right now it's really around cybersecurity. It's the one that we're focused on. So, no, we don't get into the other policy discussions per se, but we do have areas of interest for ourselves that we are the subject matter experts on.
And I ask that because one of this wasn't specific to the commissioner at DHCD. It's been a conversation, I think, for a long time when we've been trying to get this particular data that we're looking for a particular reason. We did hear from the commissioner, well, this might exist someplace else, or some of it might exist in this database, whether it's state owned or owned by someone else. And given the security issues I misused database, but thank you for clarifying, because we do want, I think any place where we get information would be a lot more active than just a storage place. Mm-hmm. Could be the taxes, it could be the landlord certificates, it could be a nonprofit's housing data website. And I'm just, if we were to sit down if DHCD was to sit down with ADS, they would have to, and they wanted to do that. They wanted to pick and choose if they had permissions, if they had all the things they needed. That to me seems like where your knowledge of security on all those things would be out front.
Yeah, in that instance, right, we would work with them to do it in the whatever was the best manner. And it's more than just for us, the technology. We also get data privacy, data compliance things. So you talk about if the sources are outside of our purview, the executive branch of the state, all of those would then, right, we would have to enter into some sort of contract or MOU or data use agreement to ensure that we're protecting it. Because if Sean Naylor was a landlord in Burlington and I provided my information to the city of Burlington for my properties there, I did so under the assumption that it was for their use and their use only, right? And so then there is we do make sure that those kind of cascading agreements are in place so that we're not going to take on liability of managing somebody's data or risk without having some sort of agreement in place. And that's then and that was one of the things that if you don't mind, if I can kind of riff on that for a second.
Yeah.
Use that to, one of the areas that was interesting to me, I found interesting, was the idea that this registry application could receive data from other entities. So I was like, oh, that's a whole nother level of functionality. But one of the things it also gets into is consent management, right? So at some point, right, when I give Amazon my information, and I say, I don't want you to sell it or use it for other things, I don't expect you to go back on that agreement and then share it with somebody else. So that was one where it's like, there would have to be due diligence to make sure that the municipalities that have these systems follow up if they don't have a consent management agreement, right, where they informed the registrants. That's right?
Yeah.
Okay, we'll go with that one.
Yeah.
That was a potential use of the data, right? So then that has to happen in order to ensure that they consent to that before we could take use of it based on kind of like the sensitivity of some of the information. So, there are some cascading effects that ADS would help from our understanding of data privacy and data and information responsibilities that we would give the department guidance on to ensure so that we weren't going down a bad path.
Right. I mean, if this showed up on your desk and you were required to figure that out, how do we get access to that data?
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like, again, you would have to reach out to Burlington or St. Johnsbury or Barry. I know what systems they use, how would it port over?
And
the agreements.
Yeah, so there's the consent piece of it, right? And there's the security. And then there's also, we've got to make sure that we have in place some sort of measure when that data comes in, that we verify that it's not a Trojan for something that, right, maybe their system was at risk, or the person that uses its PC hadn't been patched recently, and all of a sudden now the data transmitted in has some sort of, cyber bad actors code, malicious code in it, and it runs amok in our environment. And so there's pieces like that have to be considered. But then if they're all using the same system with all the same data elements, right, and the data definitions, then we would, we could build one interface, right, way of integrating and assuming their data. If they all use different systems or they define things differently, that is, every single one of those would be additional work, right? So if they, the classic example is like some places do name, right? And I put Sean G. Naylor in all in one field. Some places put first name, last name, middle initial. Well, that's now all data that's different. So now that requires, how do we transform that? How do we make that usable? And those are all going to require different levels of effort to interface. So when I saw that requirement, I'm like, that right there will be an ongoing battle, because they're going to want to upgrade their systems. And when they upgrade their systems, they won't know if the data changes, right? The database schema, the storage behind the scenes. So then when that system upgrades and we go to get the file or whatever, and it's not going to go into our system, now it's okay. Why is it? Let's go figure it out. Let's change how we're importing that data to feed this system. So there's a lot of complexity that comes with that little piece alone, which I think if we had like tons and tons of humans sitting in back room, we could just tell people, send us an Excel file, and we'd figure out what field goes from here into our database, right, and stuff like that. But that requires tons and tons of humans to be able to do that kind of stuff. And so in order to be able to do it in an automated manner, it would be a significant effort. And I'd be afraid it would be one we'd have to redo every year based on upgrades.
But that's part of the RFP. That's part of the RFI, really, is it? I mean, just to and that would be part of the actual development. So if we're paying $1 million to a vendor, we're paying them to think these things through or to hit those points.
Absolutely. So, they would, whatever the scope is, so say, I don't know, you rattled off St. Johnsbury, Brattleboro, Burlington, Barry, right? So say we have 10 communities that have an already in place registry and inspection program. We would, out of the gate, you're absolutely right, that would be part of our requirements, was to interface with those 10. But if next year they all did an upgrade, because their systems can't sit stagnant, and their upgrade changed, then we've got to go back to a vendor and change all of our 10 connections so that we can pull that data in, right? So it becomes the dynamics of having a relationship with systems that are like outside of, I don't want to use our word control, but they're not our systems that we can manage. And so we'll be blind to when they do that, is going to just create churn on some cycle, right? Whether it's annually, every 2 years, whenever they do upgrades, there is the likelihood that we're going to have additional work. So yes, you're right. Initially, it would be built for that. It's what happens in the out years that's unanticipated.
But that's part of that would be part of the ongoing maintenance of the program that we would be paying them by license.
Throw that 20% out the window then, because maintenance is like making sure that the product is secure, works on the latest browsers, produces the reports we've asked it to do, manages the data, allows, users to reset their passwords, things like that, right? It is, that 20% gets you the maintenance of that system. The tentacles that reach out to the others would be work that would be that would typically be outside of that scope. So it would be a little bit more on top of that.
No, I appreciate that. That's, so here's a dilemma I see. For us, for the legislature, with our joint fiscal office, with ADS, what I hear is that it's really hard to take a look at something. Let's just say that what's in the bill is very broad specifications. It's not, we tend not to get into the weeds because we expect rules and other folks to know what the weeds are. If I wanted to get, in general, if we were to do a fiscal note on this bill, JFO would come to you, say, can you give us an estimate of what this would be? And you'd be asked to provide a number. Or as you started today, saying we can't really until we do, you know that this is an over $1 million project perhaps, but you still have to do the work on it.
Yeah.
Sitting here, I'm like, well, can I ask you, or can the legislature ask you through statute to do the estimation work based on what we pass? So if we pass a bill that says, this is the program we want, and rather than a summer study or anything like that, we would ask you for a report on, like, how much would this cost? Because we're, on one hand, we're guessing. And, and the way we usually do business is that we guess within a limit that's provided with an idea of what JFO provides for us. But I don't think they can get as specific as you can if you're going through the application process and the RFI at the very least. If we put a thing in the bill that said, this is the program we want it to start in 18 months, would your department be able to provide us with that estimate if we said we would like you to provide us with an estimate through, and so I guess on one hand, is there a cost involved with getting an estimate? Administrative cost?
There is staff time, so there's a nominal expense, but
It's just a question I've never asked before because I've never had to be so, it's, I'm just curious because it seems to me like I would like to be as precise as possible for implementing the program. If I think that if I'm saying I, but I mean the General Assembly, if they pass this bill, says that this is a program we'd like to pursue, but we don't know the actual costs, and JFO can't provide us, and I don't know that they can't provide us, but I'm assuming that they can't do that estimate for you.
Likely not.
Yeah, and so I'm just thinking like, is it, we ask people all the time to come back, not so much with costs. Before we implement something, we come back, we assign summer study committees, we're contemplating a couple that say, bring us the policy that we need to see. So I'm just, if there was a bill that came across and it passed and it got signed into law, is that something in anticipation of a program? Because what if we can't make a decision on how much, on whether we should do this program if the costs are too out of hand?
What if the technology says it's going to be 10 million to develop up front and 2 million a year thereafter to operate, right? Or whatever, pick a number, right? Where is your appetite for, where's the threshold? I get that, right?
Argument, we see that
And
argument.
I'm not throwing that number out just
What's that?
wildly. Said I'm not throwing that number out wildly. I mean, it's an example, but I think so. I mean, we have to do other reports. We also have the benefit of the Joint Information Technology Oversight Committee that we meet with typically outside of the session, but we can meet with them during the session. And there has been, look for John Kelly from our office, but like the Unemployment Insurance Modernization has checkpoints before we get the money available by which we come back and demonstrate we've done our due diligence, what we've got is sound numbers, validate who we're going with, why, those types of things before we get $33.5 million to do the modernization. So I think there are vehicles by which we could explore and develop a more sound number and come back to this body. Whether that be through JITAC or back to the legislature as a formal report, say for January 15th.
Yeah, I'm just imagining, and I'm just really, for committee's purpose, this is all just imagining right now, but I think it has some leg to say, I can envision legislation that says we want this I can also envision why would you do this if you didn't have a policy? I mean, we're hearing this about how people were doing the estimates on family leave or any big bill where there's these widely disparate numbers of what the costs could be. And what I'm thinking is just if we emphasize that this is our policy, if we give you a document that says this is what we want to do, and you can then report back and say, okay, these are the nuances, these are the details, or you don't want to put a vendor in the position of doing an RFP, a full RFP, but if you're doing an RFI, it's a little less formal. It just would inform us in ways that I don't think we have access to otherwise.
It seems reasonable to want to have a better understanding of the total cost of impact, right, and to what it would take to do this, and that is a reasonable way to do it. I would ask that maybe ADS get appropriated like $25,000 or something just to cover staff time that it's going to take to do the research, write the RFIs, and and kind of develop that report. So it's not taking away from some other project or something like that. So it's that would be the only ask, is that it comes at least with, like I said, a nominal amount of money to cover staff time to do that work.
Sure. And just because I just think it's something for us to consider in terms of, because we can argue. I mean, again, you can say it's simple. Why should it cost this much money? And that's just a question. Or the commissioner could say, I'm sure it's going to cost over $1 million, and he's right. It might cost over $1 million. We have a fee-based system that could pay for that, but we don't have that number.
Yep.
But if we can get it in time, to balance off a policy that's set, but then we make the decision on how much it costs on whether to move forward or how to implement it. When we know how much it costs, then we can appropriate correctly.
I think it maybe another consideration or component to that would be that it would also come back with a sense of what are the options, not just cost, but right? Is there commercially available? Is there opportunity to reuse an existing registry, right? It would be a little bit beyond the hypothetical, and it would be a little bit more formed as to how the strategy to implement the technology and what the cost, then by that, what the cost would be, right? So it would also, we wouldn't be talking about, oh, well, could you use somebody else's registry? Well, I don't know. Right, I mean, but those are those are really good questions. And, I don't think we have a window during one session to get all those questions answered, right? So, I mean, the idea of doing this with a report that comes back for the second half of the biennium may make sense in this instance.
And last,
That would be better than by tomorrow when crossover is.
No, well, you're gonna give me 25 grand, you're still gonna have to do that by next Friday, right? No,
I'm not worried about, I'm not worried about this. I mean, we've thought about this process for a long time. And the concept of ADS has been relatively recent, 6-7 years.
6 years next month.
And so this idea, yes, it can take us this long to, we could have had you in to ask these questions weeks ago if we knew to think about it that way. Just to understand that when we're putting a bill out, what it takes to get execution and implementation done. And again, I'm talking at a high theoretical level. I can understand where the administration in particular is not supportive of this bill, and that may affect a whole bunch of different things, and that's fair. But I just wanted to just appreciate the time talking it through. In terms of paying for something, in the past for different programs, I've heard that a department could borrow against. So this has an income. This has a fee-based. This is a fee-based system. So ostensibly, it could pay for any millions of dollars, or hundreds of thousands of dollars, or whatever the upkeep costs over time, because of the fee could pay for that. The fee was originally intended to pay for enforcement through Department of Fire Safety, and these are just sharing, I guess, from our side. How do we rest ourselves assured that we're building an income in order to pay for a system, almost no matter what the cost is. I guess. Yeah, I'll go ahead.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure if.
No, I'll hold that thought.
Okay.
Thank you. First of all, you're speaking to a guy who wishes we still had Windows XP. That was my favorite, and I hated it when we had to keep going and going.
My
And
apologies.
my sons keep rolling their eyes at me when I have to keep asking questions. But why does it take so long? You said it could be 1 year, 2 years to build this system. I thought technology was supposed to really speed things up a lot, but why does it take so long to build something like this? It's not like, it's already out there where you can change your password on, whether it be on a DMV website or whatever the case may be. That's already there. I don't know, maybe, I know you have to reinvent that or something, I don't know, but I guess what I'm trying to figure out is, why does it take so long?
So that's a great question. And you're right, technology was supposed to make things happen quicker, faster, right? And really what it does is it allows us to make mistakes quicker, faster. And what we're seeing is gains through being able to do automation quicker usually puts us at risk. So the Chinas, the Koreas, the Russias of the world cause us to have to spend so much time doing due diligence to make sure that we're not giving them a toehold in our environment. So as innocuous as what a rental registry may seem, once they can get in, they can exploit our entire world. And that is, we don't take that lightly. So what we've seen is over the last few years, the gains in employing technology to help us do things quicker tend to have been negated by the human work that's required to ensure code is sound, that we don't have risks and vulnerabilities, because we can't point technology at that, because we can't, where were we? Government operations. I can't remember who the representative was, right? And he joked that he worked for IBM. And he was talking about, it's like, are we paying attention to ensuring that the chips that are coming in aren't Trojan horses and are bringing code in on the chips, on the laptops that we're buying, right? And so there are so many facets now of the means by which they can gain access that it's kind of negated the gains of applying technology to produce technology quicker. So it's a great question. And I would say that's really what has kind of offset those gains in the long term. Now, as far as you're right, we do have certain technologies that are reusable, but the DMV one was an example of what happened through their website, which is getting replaced with their DMV modernization system. And so that was dated technology, and we wouldn't want to build something off like a password reset from that old dated technology, because it'll become more obsolete than Windows XP, right? And when it does, it becomes a risk to us. And, I probably have said risk a ton today, and it's with measured reason. We will likely in the not foreseeable future spend probably close to 25% of all of our resources just in cybersecurity, just because the risks grow daily.
So in a nutshell, you're saying it's the security part that really takes a lot more time and effort and scrutiny than it is just, okay, this is how you change your password.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that validation of the security measures and continuous validation, because what is secure today won't be tomorrow. Because they have access to the same technology to accelerate how they write bad code, right, to attack us.
Thank you.
Representative Elder, Chestnut County.
So, thanks for all your info. That's really helpful. When we are outsourcing to a private vendor, let's say you did an RFI and then an RFP, and an existing vendor like Salesforce said, hey, we think a new module to your existing CRM is like the right solution to this problem. At that point, you've got a contract with that vendor, and to some extent, we're outsourcing the sort of security due diligence. Is that right? Because if ultimately, if a problem comes up on the Salesforce platform, doesn't our contract ultimately make it clear that Salesforce is responsible to mitigate a rogue nation state infiltrating that platform, or does somehow that platform that we've purchased, ultimately the infiltration of it is our problem? I would have thought it was Salesforce's problem in that example.
We have contract language that holds them responsible, but Salesforce isn't going to be standing at the podium explaining to Vermonters why their information was compromised.
Sure.
Right.
Sure.
And so we take a trust but verify approach. So even though Salesforce may be responsible and may do their due diligence, we also make sure that we validate it. We have, with some pretty significant vendors, found things that were kind of glossed over in our, when we did a security review that was not picked up by them. And so that's something that we just can't say that's your problem and trust that they're going to handle it. We have contract language, we have those expectations, we put that responsibility on them, but we still verify and we still take an active role in protecting Vermonters' information.
And so when you kind of extrapolate out that in the near future, you might be spending 25% of time kind of on security, mitigation or protection or whatever. Is that 25%? That's not necessarily 25% of contracts that private vendors are now being allocated to their security responsibilities. That's really saying after we've contracted for private vendors or developed our own in-house system, whichever it may be, 25% of your staff time at the agency will be spent managing risk across your fleet of softwares. Is that?
That's correct.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that's not even counting everything there. I mean, we have a security division now. We have a portion of a majority of our staff throughout the day somehow has a tie to like validating something, patching, doing security operations. But I see we are roughly a 400 staff agency. I can see where we're like pushing 100 FTEs dedicated to just watching, monitoring, protecting, validating, and auditing, right? That's one thing we don't get to do is we don't have the resources to audit. We can put that onus on the vendors and contracts, but we would like to be in a position by which we can spot audit them and make sure that they're living up to their end of it. Just because we've pushed the liability and the cost on them, I would much rather be in a position where we're not having breaches than invoking the clause by which the data breach and the vendor has to pay X amount of dollars to Vermonters to offer.
I guess I would just question, I'm sorry to cut you off, just to reframe what I'm trying to say. It's just, if we're not as well suited to develop the software, and I thought your explanation for why we would go to the private sector to contract these, I wonder if how do we know that all that effort you're spending on kind of monitoring these platforms, be they developed by you or others, how do we know that that's time well spent? You know what I mean? Like if we're not as well suited at ADS to develop a new system, why are we well suited to oversee it in place of the person that we paid to develop it? You know what I mean? I'm just concerned that there's sort of a delegation, it's a responsible decision to make, but a delegation of that work. But then there's this kind of spot checking that sounds like it's pretty resource and maybe not even spot checking, monitoring. That sounds like it's pretty resource intensive. I'm not looking for a firm answer there. I'm just kind of saying it's an interesting dynamic, right? Where we're kind of outsourcing, but then really needing to continue to do our own in-house work to assure ourselves that the things that we paid for in our contract are all actually being honored. So anyway, I'm just kind of, if I've gotten some of that wrong, please.
No, it's a valid point. And one of the things why we have been really in the administration advocating for modernization funds is we would love to own more of our future with our state staff, but so much of our staff is like managing 50-year-old mainframes at the Department of Labor for UI. So
I restrained my questions on that front for today.
I mean, that's that kind of tension that we're facing is that we have these legacy systems we can't find people to outsource to manage on our behalf. So we have to dedicate our resources. So that takes away from that. Where we're trying to do is we get to a point of modernization, and even the ideal future state is we may rely on a vendor to build it initially, right? I'm good at doing metaphors. We may hire a contractor to build us a house, but we want to be able to maintain it moving forward. Mm-hmm. And that's what we're striving toward. But sometimes we're even having to rely on them to maintain it moving forward. So that's what kind of like where I was, why we're in that cycle now is the legacy systems that are that prevent us from doing that and doing more of what we would like to do.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Representative Justin Tangeman and then Krasnow, and then we need to wrap this up, take a little break and get to our next witness, but please feel free to not rush.
But hurry up.
So the last time I heard a figure was 3 or 4 years ago, and the figure was that the state system was being attacked. About 3.5 million attacks a year. Is that number still accurate, or is that?
No. Just threats that we block at our edge firewalls is, I want to say we were around 11 or 12 million last year. We have implemented what is called a security information and event management solution, a SIM. This year is actually something that folks supported with BAA last year. We've already gone wide with it, but we're also finding things that and this is going to be a good example to the risk registry conversation, from some countries outside the US that are known to harbor bad actors in the IT space, attempts to log into public-facing systems in excess of 30 million in a 1-month period. So every single thing that we have that is public-facing is a door that we have to secure into our environment. And so they sit there and they have these things and they don't even show up against like our logs and stuff because they look like a valid attempt by somebody from the public to log in. So we've gotten to starting to do things like geo-blocking. So we're like, what's the idea? Somebody from Nigeria really wants to register a rental space with the state of Vermont. So yeah, it continues to grow tremendously.
Real short. So at that same time, 4 years ago, ADS stood up a project with Norwich University. Is that still in existence?
So we're winding that down. So Norwich, their Norwich University Applied Research Institute, served as what's called a SOC, a Security Operations Center for us. They used like upperclassmen and graduate students to provide that service. That kind of was like the first level of insight for us. The SIM that I referred to that came out of last year's BAA that we've stood up is actually hosted with a vendor called New Harbor, who's a leader in the cybersecurity space. And that is building upon the work we've done with Norwich through the Nuari, their Nuari program. So that is, we're shifting how we're working with Norwich on that moving forward.
Thank you.
Yep.
Representative Krasna, bring it home.
All right.
No pressure.
I was just curious, and maybe it's going to take more time. Have you or your agency done any research so far of what the municipalities are doing, and if they've had any security breaches or what technology they're using to keep theirs safe?
So the answer is no.
Okay.
It's a great question. Government is considered a critical infrastructure item. And so we were just this morning at 8:30 in government operations on H291, which was kind of just creating this council that will have that more umbrella. So we're by statute, we're kind of limited to the executive branch in our role.
Okay.
So that statute is looking to kind of elevate cybersecurity to like this council that is has like statewide and can look at everything from like heating oil folks that are we would consider critical infrastructure in the winter, distributors, to the grid, water, sewer, internet, hospitals, and local government. A lot of this was spawned out of that municipal, I can't even remember the name of the system now, that
OpenGov.
core?
OpenGov.
No, it was like 41 municipalities in the state were keeping their land and records management in a system. No, it's not Nemrick. It was Core or something. And but they got hacked right at Christmas, and all of their systems were unavailable to them for a number of weeks, right? And we heard about it, and I was talking to Representative Sibilia after the fact, like when it hit the news, like 2 weeks after the fact, right? And so we're like, we missed an opportunity. What if that was part of something that was more coordinated? But because they thought they were isolated to, the Dover town office and, we were seeing something else over in this space, there was no opportunity to triangulate and say, oh, maybe this is something bigger. And that's a lot of what we've introduced in H291, which was my shameless plug right
I
there.
looked it up. All right. Thank you so much.
And
Incidentally, they do use OpenGov for the Burlington system.
OpenGov.
Okay.
Thank you.
so, which is, if that means open source. Well, here, I'll give you another crossed fingers, because next year at this time, it'll all be on AI, won't it?
Yeah.
So,
ChatGPT has been a monumental leap forward in like commercial grade AI. It's been there, it's been evolving, but it's been evolving so slow. But if you're familiar with what ChatGPT is, try it. It will blow your mind.
I'm trying to avoid it.
Me too.
Right, for the time being, and anyway, I'm sure I've been interacting with AI for many
You've
years.
seen content that's come from it.
Yes.
Oh,
And I've seen art.
Yeah.
So, and then, yeah, but I mean, is AI it'll take a few years to figure out, like, I mean, for how many years did we go blockchain? And, I'm sure there's elements of blockchain which
Yeah,
are okay,
yeah.
but the way that's a long.
You're right. And that's why we have an AI council now and stuff that we're leading. And I think that's been a good model. We're already showing like some good progress from it. Why we think like a companion cybersecurity one would be good for the state.
really want that.
Well, thank you so much for taking this time. I hope you get a break before your next. I do think,
Holy smokes. My apologies.
it's okay. We try to make you feel comfortable here at home. We didn't offer you coffee, but I think that this has really been educational, and I really think every committee should talk to you in terms of how we build when we're building policy, just to understand that we can't just ignore the fact that things like this cost money, which we have some understanding of, but just to take this time with you is really a privilege and a treat. So thank you.
Well, thank you. It was great to come to this committee. Appreciate the time today, and sorry I ran over.
It's okay. We're going to take committee, so we'll go off live, and committee will be back at 10:30, please.